Good evening and welcome back to Nurse Maureen's Health Show podcast. I'm Maureen McGrath, registered nurse, nurse continence advisor, and sexual health educator, also a menopause educator, a pessary fitter. I mean, the list goes on, but ladies, you know what I'm talking about. We're like multitaskers. Well, tonight we're talking about something that could be one of the most important blood tests you've never heard of. It's called lipoprotein A, usually shortened to LPA or LP little a. And here's the thing that really caught my attention about this. You can have a relatively normal cholesterol panel. You can eat well, exercise, have a healthy weight, and do many of the right things, and still have an inherited cardiovascular risk factor that you don't even know about. That's because lipoprotein A is different from the cholesterol numbers we routinely see on a standard blood test. And as of the 2026 American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association dyslipidemia guideline, measuring lipoprotein A at least once in adulthood is recommended for cardiovascular risk assessment. May I suggest you go to your doctor and ask for a lipoprotein A test before I even tell you all about it. But I am going to answer some very important questions about it tonight. Like, what is lipoprotein A? Why does it matter? Who should be tested? What does a high number mean? Can you lower it with diet and exercise? And perhaps, most importantly, what should you do if your lipoprotein A is high? So let's start with the basics. Lipoprotein A, or LP little a, and it's pronounced LP little a. It's a type of lipoprotein, a particle that carries cholesterol and other substances through your bloodstream. Structurally, it's somewhat similar to LDL cholesterol, which is why you may hear people describe it as an LDL-like particle. But lipoprotein A has an additional protein attached to it, and it's called apolipoprotein A. And that little difference is incredibly important. High levels of lipoprotein A are associated with an increased risk of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, including heart attack and stroke, as well as calcific aortic valve disease. Here's what makes LP little a different. One of the most important things to understand about lipoprotein A, or LP little a, is that it is largely genetic. In other words, you can't change it. Your LPA level is primarily determined by your genes. That means you didn't necessarily develop a high lipoprotein A because you ate too much bacon, even though you may have eaten too much bacon. You didn't necessarily develop it because you didn't exercise enough, and you may not exercise enough. And you didn't necessarily develop it because you're overweight. In fact, lifestyle changes have very little effect on the actual lipoprotein A number. Now, before you get discouraged, that does not mean lifestyle doesn't matter. It matters enormously. It just means we need to distinguish between lowering lipoprotein A and lowering your overall cardiovascular risk. And those are not the same thing. So why should we care about lipoprotein A, and why is it the sexiest new blood test around? It's an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. That's why. And this is important because your lipoprotein A, or LP little a, can add cardiovascular risk even when your LDL cholesterol isn't particularly high. Think about it this way. You get your cholesterol checked. Your doctor says your LDL looks pretty good. That's reassuring, but it doesn't tell you everything about your cardiovascular risk. There are other particles and risk factors that can matter. Lipoprotein A, or LPA, LP little a, I should say, lots of rhymes there, is one of them. And the higher the LP little a, the greater the associated cardiovascular risk. The 2026 guideline describes the risk as continuous rather than there being one magical number where risk suddenly begins. For example, an LP little a level of 125 nmoles per liter, or approximately 50 milligrams per deciliter, is associated with about a 1.4-fold relative increase in atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease risk, while levels around 250 nmoles per liter are associated with approximately twice the risk. Very high levels can be associated with substantially greater risk. Though this isn't simply high equals bad, normal equals good. It's far more nuanced than that. Like a lot of things in healthcare. The higher the level, the more important it becomes to look at the whole cardiovascular picture. The next question you're probably thinking is, well, do I have this? How common is high lipoprotein A? This isn't some incredibly rare genetic condition, you'll be surprised to find out. In fact, LP little a is common. The American Heart Association estimates that it affects approximately 1 in 5 people worldwide. And many people have no idea that they have an elevated level because lipoprotein A isn't included in a standard cholesterol panel. And that's why I say go, no matter how old you are as an adult, go and get your lipoprotein A checked. It's really important. And it's a big problem that it's not included in your standard cholesterol panel. But you're going to ask your doctor for it the next time you go to see your doctor. Because if you don't measure it, you don't know it. And it really doesn't change over life. You really only need one lipoprotein A. So you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, I've never heard about this. I eat well, I exercise, I run, I sleep well, I maintain a good weight, I have reduced my alcohol consumption. Why haven't I ever heard about this before? And that's a great question. For decades, when we talked about cholesterol and cardiovascular risk, the conversation focused heavily on total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, triglycerides, and those numbers are still extraordinarily important for you. But our understanding of cardiovascular disease has become much more sophisticated. We now know that there are multiple types of atherogenic particles and multiple pathways contributing to cardiovascular risk. Lipoprotein A has increasingly become recognized as an important inherited risk factor, and the guidelines have caught up with the science. The National Lipid Association recommended measuring lipoprotein A or LP little a at least once in all adults in its 2024 update, and the 2026 ACC-AHA guideline now recommends measurement at least once in all adults. So who should get tested? Everybody, in my opinion. The current recommendation is exactly that. Everyone should have it checked at least once. That's because lipoprotein A is largely genetically determined and tends to remain relatively stable throughout your life. For many people, you don't need to keep checking it every year, for example. So one measurement can provide you with valuable information about your inherited cardiovascular risk. And, there's a lot of people who don't want to have this done because they don't want to know about their increased cardiovascular risk or their increase of Alzheimer's disease or their increase of cancer, so they don't do the genetic testing. But, this is really important because there are some modifiable things and we're making advances in medicine all the time. So it's important to know. And testing, however, is particularly important if you have a family history of premature heart disease. So somebody died of a heart attack at age 40, 49, 52. Or you have a personal history of premature cardiovascular disease, or a family history of elevated LPA. So if you have a sibling that has an elevated lipoprotein A, it's a good idea that you get yours checked as well. If you have familial hypercholesterolemia, get your LPA checked, and premature aortic stenosis as well. And if someone has a high LPA, testing can also be considered for their first degree relatives, parents, siblings, and children. And, genetics runs in families. So, that's why if you know somebody in your family, or if you get tested and you have an elevated LP little a, share that with your siblings, with your parents, with your children. It's important. I think we need to have a bigger conversation around heart disease. We often associate it with men only, that men die of heart attacks and men have cardiovascular disease and women don't. But that's not the truth. You may, as a woman, have been told that heart disease is primarily a problem for men, but it's the number one cause of death in women as well. It's a major health issue for women, cardiovascular disease, and women can have risk factors that aren't always recognized early enough. And it can oftentimes be, women often get dismissed in doctors' offices. Well, LP little a is particularly interesting because levels can change during certain life stages, including pregnancy and menopause. So for women, you may have it checked a couple of times during your lifetime. We shouldn't just be talking about blood pressure and LDL cholesterol. We need to think about the bigger picture, and this is such an important blood test. Now let's talk the numbers, and there's an ever important caveat here. LP little a can can be reported in different units. So you may see the NMOL per liter or the milligrams per deciliter, the nmol per liter or the milligram per deciliter. These units are not directly interchangeable using one universal conversion because the size of the ApoA component varies between people. So don't use a simple online conversion calculator to interpret your number. Ideally, look at the units on your actual laboratory report and discuss the result with your healthcare provider. The National Lipid Association describes less than 75 nmoles per liter as low risk, 75 to 124 nmoles per liter as intermediate, and 125 nmoles per liter or higher as high, with corresponding approximate milligram per deciliter categories of less than 30, 30 to 49, and greater than or equal to 50 milligrams per deciliter. But again, think of LPA as a continuum of risk rather than one number that suddenly turns you from healthy to unhealthy. So you're probably wondering this whole time, okay, I probably have it. 1 in 5 people have it. How can I lower my LPA with diet? Can you do that? Well, this is one of the most frustrating parts. For most people, the answer, sadly, is no. Diet and exercise generally don't significantly lower the actual lipoprotein A concentration because genetics plays such a large role. But please don't interpret that as, then why bother eating healthy? Because lifestyle is still incredibly important. If you have a high lipoprotein A, you want to control the things you can control. That means eating a heart-healthy diet, being physically active every day, maintaining a healthy weight. Get on the scale every day. I recommend that. A lot of people don't want to do that. But if you can see your weight inching up, then you want to know that perhaps you need to eat a bit more, eat healthier, not skip breakfast, not eat after dinner, lots of things that you can do. Increase your exercise. You also do not want to smoke. Do not smoke. And also it's really important that you know what your blood pressure is. You understand what the numbers mean. And if you've had a high blood pressure, even in the doctor's office, you want to do some home blood pressure monitor readings. So it's really important that your blood pressure is 120 over 80 or below. If you have diabetes, it's important that you manage diabetes. And very importantly, addressing LDL cholesterol and other modifiable cardiovascular risk factors appropriately. The goal isn't necessarily to make the lipoprotein A number disappear. The goal is to reduce your overall cardiovascular risk. So it's important that you lose weight, increase your exercise, stop smoking, manage your stress. So what if your lipoprotein A is high? This is probably the most important question. First thing, do not panic. It's good to know. A high lipoprotein A does not mean you're going to have a heart attack. It means you've identified an additional risk factor. And that can actually be very useful information because now you and your healthcare provider can take a closer look at the rest of your cardiovascular risk profile. And that may include your LDL cholesterol, blood sugar, blood pressure, smoking status, family history, and other cardiovascular risk factors. And in selected people where the decision about treatment is uncertain, a coronary artery calcium scan or CAC scan may help refine cardiovascular risk. The 2026 guideline has expanded recommendations around selective CAC use. Maybe you're thinking, what about statins? This is another area where people can get confused. Statins generally aren't used because they lower LPA because they don't reliably do that. So that's not why they're used. Instead, when someone has elevated Lp(a), doctors may place greater, and nurse practitioners and NDs place greater emphasis on controlling LDL cholesterol and other modifiable risk factors. The 2026 guideline specifically states that elevated lipoprotein A should prompt more intensive management of LDL-C and other cardiovascular risk factors. So if your LPA is high, the answer isn't there's nothing you can do. It's actually there's plenty you can do to reduce your overall risk. And you're probably wondering if there are medications that lower lipoprotein A. And this is an area of enormous interest. Researchers are developing therapies specifically designed to reduce lipoprotein A, including medications that target the production of ApoA. Some investigational therapies have produced very large reductions in lipoprotein A. But here's the important distinction. Lowering lipoprotein A in a blood test is not automatically the same thing as proving that a treatment prevents heart attacks and strokes. That's why clinical outcome trials matter. We're waiting for the evidence to tell us whether dramatically lowering your lipoprotein A translates into fewer cardiovascular events. And this is a very active area of cardiovascular research. So, should your family get tested? Well, if you discover that you have a significantly elevated lipoprotein A, this is certainly worth discussing. Because lipoprotein A is inherited, close family members may also have elevated levels. The current guideline recommends cascade testing of first-degree relatives in people with high lipoprotein A, particularly when there is premature cardiovascular disease, familial hypercholesterolemia, or premature aortic stenosis in the family. So one blood test could potentially uncover cardiovascular risk in several members of a family, and that's why it's important. So my take-home message for you this evening, let's bring it all together. If you remember only 5 things from tonight's episode, please remember these. Number 1, lipoprotein A is a type of lipoprotein that can increase cardiovascular risk. Number 2, your lipoprotein A level is largely determined by genetics. Number 3, a standard cholesterol panel does not usually include lipoprotein A. Number 4, current guidelines recommend that adults have lipoprotein A measured at least once. And number 5, if your lipoprotein A is high, please don't panic. Use that information to be more proactive about everything else you can control. And yes, there's so much that is within your control. If you're sitting here thinking, I don't know my lipoprotein A, here are some questions you can take to your next doctor's or nurse practitioner appointment. Have I ever had my lipoprotein A measured? People don't know. Should I have a lipoprotein A test? I think the answer is yes. So you may want to ask for one. Also, what are my LDL cholesterol and ApoB levels? What is my overall cardiovascular risk? And if your lipoprotein A is elevated, should my family members be tested? Should we be more aggressive about lowering my LDL cholesterol? And depending on your individual risk, would additional cardiovascular testing, such as a coronary artery calcium scan, be appropriate for you? I think lipoprotein A is a fascinating example of how medicine evolves. Sometimes we discover that the tests we've been doing for decades don't tell the whole story. And that's why I love talking about prevention, because information gives us an opportunity. If you have discovered that you have an elevated LPA, you cannot change your genes, but you can change the conversation that you have with your healthcare provider. You can be more proactive about your blood pressure, your LDL cholesterol, your lifestyle, your diabetes risk, your smoking status, and your overall cardiovascular health. So if you've never heard of lipoprotein A or Lp(a) before tonight, maybe this is the episode that prompts you to ask one simple question at your next appointment. Do I know my LPA? Because sometimes the most important number isn't the one you've been checking for years. It's the one you've never checked at all. I'm Nurse Maureen. If you feel that this episode could help somebody that you love, feel free to share it. And I'll see you next time on Nurse Maureen's Health Show podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in.